They say a gentleman must keep his hands and his thoughts in check. I have always been quite good at it, until she crossed my halls dressed as a maid, but with the bearing of a queen. Every gesture of hers, a challenge, every look, a provocation. She bewitches me more than I dare admit, and nothing worries me more than knowing I must step away from her out of duty, even when everything in me wants to break too many rules to remain immune. If you are going to accompany me to the end, at least do so like a prudent lady. Leave your appreciation registered. Tap the like button, subscribe to this channel, activate the bell, grace me by hitting the hype button. Thus I will be waiting for you, whenever you wish to hear me again.
The rain in that part of Yorkshire had a special talent for humiliation. It was not a storm, nor was it a breeze. It was a chilling courtesy that infiltrated the collar and reminded drop by drop that the world did not care about women like me. One day, I was Lady Selina Ravenshade, the only daughter of an earl who taught me to distinguish a Bordeaux from a Burgundy by the scent, to dance without dropping my flower crown, and to converse as if every word were a musical note. Today, I was just Selina, and I couldn't even say that with certainty. Since my father passed, the house had become the territory of another woman, with daughters who measured their worth by their reflection in the mirror and the number of wedding rings they collected. I gradually traded ball gowns for aprons and drawing rooms for cold corridors. And when I realized that my life would only be one of service, I ran away. The carriage borrowed from Nora, my childhood friend, dropped me off at the west gate of Windmere Hall, a property so imposing it seemed to know, by right, that it did not need to impress. The gray stone of the towers rose against the overcast sky, surrounded by wild gardens that not even the rain dared to tame. I stepped down carefully, lifting my simple skirt, and almost betrayed myself. My shoulders remembered their place. My chin aligned itself. It was the kind of posture that is not lost, even when one trades satin for coarse wool. The door of Windmere Hall opened before I could knock. The housekeeper was there, a battle-ready bun, eyes that assessed every inch of me as if she could weigh a person's value by the stitching of their skirt. Name? Her voice cut through the air, dry. Selina. Surname? I hesitated. Ravenshade was not just a name, it was a sentence. It could open doors in other situations, yes, but in my case it would certainly attract hands ready to drag me back to a place where I would have no voice. I was on the run, and there were faces that could never recognize me. So I resorted to the only safe refuge I had left, the surname of Nora, the daughter of the housekeeper in my former home, the friend who, with steady hands and silent courage, had helped me escape in the dead of night. Elmswood. Selina Elmswood. It was then that I heard firm footsteps on the gravel. I glanced up and saw him, a tall man with shoulders that seemed made to carry the world without complaint, coming down the path flanked by trimmed yews. He carried leather gloves in his hands, and next to him walked a younger man, the same mischievous expression that only brothers share, carrying a freshly caught pheasant on his shoulder. The older man, evidently the master of the house, moved with the feline calm of one who does not need to hurry to occupy space. His beard shadowed a firm chin, his golden hair was wind-tousled, and there was a slight scent of gunpowder mixed with leather and wet earth. He was, without a doubt, a man who knew where he was and what he wanted. It was at that moment I remembered who I was pretending to be. I lowered my eyes, like a well-behaved maid. Not that I didn't know how to sustain a gaze, but to survive, sometimes one must yield at the right moment. And so, with the hem of my damp skirt still clinging to my ankles, I heard his first sentence. It did not sound like a command. It was more a jest dressed in nobility.
The morning hunt had been fruitful. Perry was satisfied, carrying the pheasant as if it were a trophy for the evening's ball. The cold wind had numbed my hands, but my humor was warm. I bet Mrs. Trumbull has already sharpened her tongue to receive us, Perry said, swinging his hat. Or she will lecture about the Persian rug being more precious than the Ashworth lineage itself, I retorted, drawing a laugh from him. And then, there was she, not exactly standing, but anchored as if that threshold had been built just to frame her. She was dressed simply, but her body gave away another story. Her spine naturally straight, her chin at the exact measure between humility and haughtiness, and her hands holding the hem of the wet wool dress with a precision that one does not learn in the scullery. It was like finding a jewel wrapped in brown paper, and feeling that only I noticed the shine beneath. As we approached the front door, Mrs. Trumbull straightened as one who claims the responsibility of preserving the decorum of Windmere Hall. The housekeeper was ready, beginning her interrogation, but I did not hear the reply to the surname. Or rather, I heard and noticed the pause. That second of silence told me, I am choosing the right lie. I approached, taking off my gloves with the calm of one too curious to disguise it. "Mrs. Trumbull," I said with my best tone of irreverent seriousness, "I believe we can solve the matter of the rain by hiring someone who knows how to deal with delicate fabrics, especially mine." "My lord," she said with a respectful nod, "this is Selina Elmswood, a candidate for a position in the laundry." My brother inclined his head in a polite gesture, but could not resist a comment, his voice low enough to sound like an innocent observation, a firm gaze for someone applying to wash stockings, undergarments, and sheets. The maid, or maid candidate, kept her face lowered, but the corner of her mouth betrayed a silent resistance. "Miss Elmswood will be instructed on the routines of the house," Mrs. Trumbull continued in a practical tone. "She will start by assisting in the washing and conservation of the bed linens and towels. We need hands that treat the linen and cotton with due care." "Understood, ma'am," Selina replied, trying to sound confident. The housekeeper continued, as if reciting rules engraved in stone. "Timetables must be respected with punctuality. Circulation through private wings is not allowed without authorization. And if my lord or the guests happen to request any service, you must respond with promptness." "Naturally," Selina agreed, her eyes lowered. But there was a subtle gleam there, a spark that did not belong to just any maid. "I hope you know, Miss Elmswood," I interrupted in a light tone but with an air of inspection, "that I am particularly demanding about my clothes." The maid lifted her gaze. For an instant, that look held mine as if she knew things she had no right to know. Then she lowered it again, with rehearsed humility. "I learn quickly, my lord, and I take good care of what is entrusted to me. Here at Windmere Hall, we have a certain affection for maintaining things in their original format. Clothes that do not shrink, coats that do not fade at the first contact with hot water, and handkerchiefs that do not become so starched with starch that they look like plaster casts." I slightly inclined my head, observing. "And above all, hands that know how to distinguish when a fabric only asks for Marseille soap, and when an error can cost an entire trousseau." Her eyes for an instant rose in my direction with an arrogance so subtle that it could almost be mistaken for insolence. There was no fear there, only a faint trace of pride that was reluctant to be tamed. But as quickly as it came, the expression closed under a mask of well-rehearsed humility. "I will do my best, my lord." "Ah, I do not like bests," I retorted, feeling Mrs. Trumbull stiffen because I was prolonging myself. "I prefer guarantees. What else recommends you for the position?" "I am discreet, and I have a good memory." Memory. I let the word slide in my mind like old thick wine. A good memory is dangerous. It can guard secrets, or expose them at the wrong time. Mrs. Trumbull, take note. Discreet, good memory, and hands that know exactly when to use wood, ash, and when to keep a fabric away from it. The housekeeper blinked as if unsure whether she was taking notes for the hiring or for a poem. Then she straightened up, trying to regain her composure. "Very well, Miss Elmswood. I will provide a uniform and take you to the servants' quarters." Selina made a brief curtsy, not deep enough to be submissive, but polite enough not to arouse censure, and then she departed alongside Mrs. Trumbull, who led her down the corridor with a rigid air, although still seeming slightly bewildered to see my lord personally conducting a servant interview. When the internal door closed behind them, Perry broke the silence with a wry smile. "So now you even interfere with the hiring of the laundresses." I crossed my arms, deliberately calm. "I need to be aware of everything that happens under my roof, Perry. Of absolutely everything." He let out a low chuckle but did not reply. He just looked at me, curious and intrigued. Like someone who knows that this time, my attention was not focused on the walls of Windmere Hall, but on the person who had just crossed them. The truth is, it was already decided. Not because Mrs. Trumbull needed help, but because, from the moment I first looked at the young woman, I knew there was something to uncover there, and by the look she gave me before turning away, I was certain that the answer would not come without a fight.
I already knew that accepting the position of laundry assistant would not be simple, but I did not imagine that fate, capricious as always, would place me before the greatest challenge on the very first morning. His lordship's clothes. Men's clothes. Nothing I hadn't already seen on the clothesline of my former home, when I hurried through the yard to avoid the housekeeper's supervision. But they were clothes of other men, and none of them was him. The pieces were piled on the rustic table, impeccably cut shirts, vests that held the precise line of his shoulders, and there, folded with the precision of a devoted butler, the piece so personal that it made my hands hesitate, not because of its nature, but because of the unexpected intimacy my new job demanded. "If you use water that is too hot, the linen will shrink," murmured Mary, the older maid, adjusting her apron. "Marseille soap, scrub gently and then rinse twice. And don't forget to change the water when it starts to look like laundress's soup." "Understood," I replied, trying to sound confident. Mary gave a wry smile, grabbed a basket of towels and announced, "I'll be back in a moment. I'm just taking this out to dry in the courtyard." The door creaked, and I was left alone with the steam, the smell of soap, and his belongings. I started with the shirts, scrubbing them with more zeal than I would admit. It was impossible not to imagine those pieces accompanying the warmth of the body that wore them. My gaze stubbornly lingered on the curve of the collar, the line where the fabric would meet his skin. I picked up the neckcloth of fine fabric, soft as well-worked silk. As I moved it, a unique fragrance filled my nostrils, discreet, but impossible to ignore. There was something of polished wood, warmed leather, and a refined perfume that mingled with the heat of someone accustomed to commanding. I brought it to my nose and inhaled slowly. "Only curiosity," I murmured to myself, as if repeating the lie would make it true. But heavens, besides being handsome, the man was fragrant. I dropped the neckcloth back onto the pile, trying to ignore the involuntary smile, and reached for the trousers. The cut was impeccable, the wool of quality, and holding them I realized how wide and firm they were on the legs, measurements of a large, strong man, far beyond the thin and slender lords I was accustomed to associating with. I imagined, for a moment, the presence that this body must impose upon entering any place, and dismissed the thought like someone dropping a hot coal before being burned. I plunged the pieces into the tub, the soap dissolving slowly in the warm water. I sank my hands up to my wrists and began to scrub carefully, but soon felt my skin tingle and prickle under the rough contact. "By all the scented salts of the Queen," I whispered between my teeth, raising my fingers to see the tips, already reddened. And there I was, scrubbing men's clothes in a damp laundry room, trying to calm the fine skin that was never meant for this work. A lady by birth, with refined education, hidden behind an apron, as if soap and steam could erase a title and save me from an even worse fate. I turned back to the pile of clothes, and then, there it was, the notorious piece that should not arouse so much interest. A white, fine linen undergarment, still holding the crease of his body. I held it up in the air, studying it with an almost scientific air. "Well, my lord," I murmured to myself, amused, feeling a slight flush rise to my cheeks. "Now we are intimately acquainted." That's when I heard a discreet throat clearing behind me. My body froze, the undergarment still suspended at the height of my face. Heat struck me from head to toe, and it was not the fault of the tub's steam.
I swear my intention was just to pass by the laundry room on the way to the armory, but fate, which is rarely satisfied with the predictable, decided to offer me a unique spectacle. There was the new maid, Miss Elmswood, according to Mrs. Trumbull, with her sleeves rolled up and a flush that even 3 steps away, I knew did not come from physical exertion. She held my undergarment with accurate interest, as if it were a valuable scroll to be analyzed by a scholar. I cleared my throat, just enough for her to realize she was no longer alone. Well, the pleasure is all mine, miss." She almost let the piece slip from her hands. The blush rose up her neck to the roots of her brown hair. It was an unusual and curiously delightful scene for me. "Oh, heavens, I did not expect to find your lordship here," she said in a thread of a voice. trying to sound humble but carrying a tension that did not go unnoticed. "And yet, here I am," I replied, leaning against the doorframe as if it were my throne. On my way to another engagement, I decided to satisfy a curiosity. "How you are adapting to the service." "I am learning," she murmured, lowering her eyes like a good maid. But I already knew. It was not humility she was hiding there, it was embarrassment. Delicious embarrassment provoked by what she held. My gaze fell upon the piece in her hands, one of my most intimate garments, and a slow smile came to me. "May I trust that these will survive the washing, Miss Elmswood? They are, let's say, items of strategic use." She lifted her gaze quickly, surprised and constrained. "My lord," she began with the tone of one intending to request some decorum, but stopped herself, remembering the role she played. "Forgive me, I did not mean to sound offended," I completed, finding it all even more amusing. "Not at all. I am merely ensuring that you comprehend the importance of every item I entrust to you, especially those that hold, shall we say, a certain personal zeal that I appreciate preserving." Her breath wavered, and I noticed the flush deepen, an irresistible effect. I took a step forward, observing her hands, so delicate for that work. Her fingers moved, scratching each other as if the soap was irritating the fine skin. "Marseille soap," I commented softer, "implacable with stains, and even more so with hands not made for scrubbing." She tried to smile. "My hands are already accustomed to the service, my lord." That is not what it appears to me, however." I inclined my head. "To my eyes, your skin seems more sensitive than normal, as if it were created to hold silk, feathers, crystal glasses, and never to be plunged into hot water and abrasive products." Her mouth curved into an almost imperceptible smile, an apology for her own existence, and at the same time, a silent challenge for me to dare underestimate her. And then her eyes. A mysterious ocean, calm at first glance but with deep currents that invited a dangerous dive. What is happening to me? I thought, looking at a maid, feeling a restless impulse, that dangerous attraction that arises when something or someone dismantles us from within. "Tell me, Miss Elmswood, where do you come from?" I asked, casting the net with a casual voice. She replied without hesitation, but too quickly, as if the answer had been rehearsed. "From the village of Brindleford, my lord." "Ah, Brindleford." I nodded but stored the tone in my memory, more rehearsed than natural. Before I could probe her further, the creaking of the door announced Mary's return. The older maid stopped on the threshold holding an empty basket, and froze for a second upon seeing me there. Her gaze flickered between me and the new hire, as if trying to understand what kind of inspection a lord would personally conduct in the laundry room. I straightened my shoulders, composing the serious face I use in council meetings. "Well, I shall not interrupt the work," I said, adjusting my gloves as if I were already on my way to another destination. "I need to find Perry in the armory." As I passed her, I cast a sidelong glance at Miss Elmswood, quick but loaded with a silent message. This is not over. And by the distrustful gleam I saw in her eyes, I was certain she understood perfectly.
Gradually, I learned that life in the service wing of Windmere Hall had a rhythm of its own. It started early, with the sound of pots on the wood stove and the smell of bread being taken from the oven, and ended late, when even the lanterns seemed to blink with exhaustion. The work was heavy, and my hands, too delicate for the harshness of soap and buckets, were already red and rough. Still, there was a strange satisfaction in seeing the clean laundry hanging on the lines, or the silver gleaming on the table after my final polish. I never imagined that this would happen to me one day. I remember, with silent bitterness, how the changes began. After my father's death, Lady Honoria took over the house as if it were a chessboard, and I, a piece that needed to be moved back to the edge. First, I lost the room that had been mine since childhood. I was moved to a cubicle next to the kitchen. Then, the small tasks began. Just to help, they said. Helping became a habit. Habit became an obligation. An obligation became my new identity. Here, however, I was still new. Mrs. Trumbull watched me with that experienced gaze that weighs every gesture, like someone measuring the fiber of a person before deciding if they belonged to the house. And, although she noticed my inexperience, She seemed satisfied with my dedication. "You are doing well, Selina," she commented one afternoon, while I was aligning glasses in the pantry. "You learn quickly and do not shy away from work. That is rare." "I do my best, ma'am," I replied, maintaining a respectful tone. She slightly inclined her head, like someone evaluating not only the answer, but the manner in which it is given. "For that very reason, I need to give you some advice." She paused briefly, making sure I was paying attention. "I have noticed some lingering glances and certain pleasantries from the young men among the staff. Not all mean ill, but remember, this house values decorum, and it is my responsibility to ensure that nothing compromises the name of those who serve here." I lowered my eyes, absorbing those words. There was a genuine, almost maternal care in her tone, a concern I had not felt for a long time. "I understand, ma'am," she nodded, satisfied with the answer, and moved on to inspect the table setting. I stood for a moment looking at my own hands, feeling a pang of gratitude for having someone who worried about my conduct. But the next thought brought me back to reality. If Mrs. Trumbull knew who truly occupied my thoughts, and that the handsome face and dangerous gaze of his lordship were the true threat to my decorum, she would not only chase me out of the house, but would have me at the gate before nightfall.
The county matters were rarely exciting, but they had their weight. Thomas brought me reports on leases and repairs to some tenant houses, and we discussed the budget for the spring harvest. Perry, as always, participated only as long as boredom permitted him. "I have a game at the club tonight and perhaps a glass or two," he said, adjusting his coat. "Are you coming with me?" "Another day, perhaps," I replied without haste. "Today I need to draft letters to the administrators and, resolve some pending matters." Perry raised an eyebrow like someone who suspects that pending matters do not always mean paper and ink, but he did not comment. He left whistling, and I allowed myself a smile. The truth is, my letters could wait. What could not wait was the opportunity to cross paths by chance with Miss Elmswood. And that is how I found her, in the side garden, gathering flowers to decorate the guest rooms. She did not see me immediately, inclined over a bed of irises. The afternoon sun touched her hair, and her posture, even in a simple gesture, carried an elegance not learned in kitchens. "If you keep cutting like that, you will ruin Sir Malcolm's entire collection," I said, approaching with a casual tone. She straightened up with a start, adjusting her apron. "I am only following instructions, my lord." "Instructions or not, there is a technique for gathering rare flowers without offending them," I commented, taking one of the freshly cut stems and examining it. "This one, for example, does not like rough cuts. It prefers a quick, almost courteous gesture." She smiled lightly, and I realized she was amused by my analogy. "And I imagine your lordship learned this in your many encounters with flowers." "Among other things," I retorted, letting the phrase hang with a double meaning. "But I see that the miss knows the subject as well. Your gestures are not those of just any laundress." It was then that she, distracted, quoted a line. "As the good poet would say, flowers are the earth's smile to the heavens." I recognized the quote immediately, and it was not the kind of phrase one hears from a maid. "Do you know the works of Wordsworth?" I asked, keeping my voice light but attentive to every nuance of her face. Her eyes widened for just an instant, as if she realized too late what she had let slip. I heard my former mistress recite," she said quickly, returning her attention to the flowers she held. I did not believe it for a second, but I smiled as if I accepted the answer. "Of course. A cultivated mistress, then. How lucky you were." She gave a brief nod, like someone who wished to end the subject, but I had no intention of ending it. "Do you have family, Miss Elmswood?" I asked, like someone making conversation for distraction. "No. My parents died." The pause was short, precise. "I have had no one for some years." I nodded, as if it were just an irrelevant piece of information, though I stored it away. "And before coming here, where did you work?" "In another house," she answered without hesitation, but offered nothing more than that. "Until it was necessary to leave. I imagine it was not easy to leave the place. Some departures never are." Her gaze shifted to the flowers, as if the stem of a dahlia was more urgent than any memory. "And your childhood, was it happy?" I asked, leaning slightly, studying her. A serene, wistful, and melancholic nostalgia crossed her gaze. Yes, I can say it was happy for a time. I lost my mother early, but I lived with my father for good years in Raven. She interrupted herself so quickly she might have bitten her tongue. I mean Brindleford Hollow, as I previously informed your lordship. She smiled briefly, controlledly. I mentally stored the slip-up. What was she about to say but stopped? Ah, yes, I recall. So, did you always work in the laundry in the old house you served? I asked with apparent indifference. Not only. She raised her eyes to me. I also helped with other services, organizing rooms, sometimes as a chambermaid. Chambermaid, I repeated, my eyebrow arched. And why, in heaven's name, trade a position like that for hanging out soaked sheets and scrubbing undergarments? She blushed. Because I cannot afford the luxury of choosing work, my lord. The answer was quick, firm. And, evidently there are no ladies in this house. Therefore, there is no chambermaid position for me to apply for. The logic was impeccable, but her gestures, the way she handled the flowers, her posture, the almost ceremonial care, screamed refinement. A refinement that no laundry room in the world would teach. I nodded slowly, letting the silence work for me, and as she placed the flowers in the basket, I watched her as a man watches something he does not know whether he wants to decipher or possess, simple in attire, impeccable in bearing, and with a beauty that, even disguised, was impossible not to notice. I found myself wondering in silence, was she running away from something or someone? I leaned in slightly, as if to confide something. I have observed your work, Miss Elmswood. Meticulous, careful. Few people treat clothes as if they were jewels. She seemed to want to thank me, but only said, I do my best to meet expectations, my lord. And you succeed, I replied, letting the phrase settle between us before changing my tone. Do you like to read? Her eyes shone with the question, but the answer was restrained. Yes. It is one of the few pleasures that a maid's life can allow. In that case, I said with a half-smile, consider yourself authorized to take books from my library. For a moment, the control she maintained over herself wavered. There was a sincere flash of joy in her eyes, and I needed no more to confirm that. I had touched something genuine. I thank your lordship, she said, in a voice softer and lower than before. When she turned to walk away, I realized that no matter how hard she tried to remain reserved, there was one detail impossible to ignore. This woman carried mysteries like others carry expensive necklaces, and I was determined to discover every one of them.
The day had come to an end, and with it, the succession of tasks that, although repetitive, kept me safe. The clothes washed, the floors swept, the towels folded. The world of service was made to keep the hands busy and the mind at rest. Or so it should be. I closed the door of my small room and inhaled deeply. The smell of soap and clean linens still hung in the air. I took a quick bath, scrubbing my skin until I felt lighter. But it was not just to rid myself of dust. There was a restlessness in me that water could not wash away. When the house plunged into silence, the comfortable silence that only arrives after the last doors close, I took a candle in hand and followed the corridors with the steps of one who fears being heard. The Earl's library had always fascinated me, and now he had kindly granted me permission to take his books. I felt intimately excited, as I hadn't felt in years. I had no intention of disturbing anyone, only looking, perhaps choosing a title to read discreetly in my room. The certainty that he was out, as I had seen him leave with his brother after dinner, gave me the necessary courage that I could resort to the collection without the risk of encountering him, and being afflicted again by his curiosity about me. Every caution was little near that man who asked too many questions. I pushed the door open carefully. The smell of waxed wood and the leather of the bindings embraced me like a forbidden perfume. The shelves rose to the ceiling, each spine flaunting golden letters that shone under the trembling light of my candle. I ran my fingers over the spines, feeling the relief of the letters like someone tracing a secret map, until, among so many respectable titles, I found a curious one, a book whose title, so daring, made me look over my shoulder before touching it. I carefully removed it, like someone stealing a secret. The title in worn letters, The Confessions of a Libertine, by a certain Marquis of Northam, already made me feel as if I had touched fire with my own hands. I knew I shouldn't even breathe near it, but curiosity was stronger. I opened it to a random page. I read one sentence, then another. My face began to burn. The words were scandalously daring, so daring that I had to close the book for an instant, feeling my face heat up. They were not descriptions appropriate for a silent library, nor for my imagination at that moment. I swallowed hard, unable to finish reading it in my mental voice without feeling a strange heat in my body. A pang of shame made me look around, but as there was no living soul nearby, I continued. Of course I continued. My heart beat rapidly, as if every line were an invitation to sin, when I came across an even more audacious description, involving the bare back of a man, the firmness of the muscles, and the heat that the text suggested. I felt as if my eternal destiny had just been sealed for hell, and to my absolute horror, my mind decided to illustrate the scene with a very specific male body. Miss. The low, grave voice sounded behind me, along with the warm, firm touch of a hand resting on my shoulder. I jumped, letting out a muffled scream, dropping the book open on the floor, exposing to the world, and to him, the condemned page. And then I turned, to find the Earl there, eyes deeply blue, golden hair slightly disheveled, his shirt open, exposing part of his chest, revealing a man more informal than usual. The image from my mind revealed before me in flesh and blood. "My lord," I stammered, feeling my face burn. I did not. I quickly bent down to pick up the volume, but he was faster.
I returned earlier than expected. The gentleman's club, with its air saturated with smoke, cards, and lukewarm conversation, failed to hold my interest tonight. There was a discomfort in me, a restlessness that neither my brother's laughter nor the insinuating perfume of the women who crossed my path could appease. The truth is, with every sip of my favorite brandy, her image infiltrated the golden vapors of the glass, and I realized I was condemned. I gave up on prolonging the night. I returned home under the heavy silence of the streets, with my coat open, my waistcoat unbuttoned, and my neckcloth slightly loose, as if my whole body had already decided it needed to breathe away from any convention. Upon crossing the vestibule, I casually tossed my coat onto a chair and poured myself another measure, drinking slowly, like someone trying to tame a fire growing within. It was absurd. A maid, a blessed maid, and yet, the only one capable of dislodging all the others from my mind. The most irritating thing was that there was nothing docilely innocent about her. There was something, a hidden flame beneath every restrained gesture, that made me wonder what it would be like to see that flame explode. I was on my way to my room, determined to end the night, when a subtle movement in the shadowy corridor caught my attention. There she was. She walked with the calculated delicacy of one carrying a secret. The candle, lit and steady in her hand, made her face shine for moments before it was lost again in the gloom. Each step was measured, as if counting the beat of something I did not yet know. I followed her, not out of necessity, but out of the most dangerous kind of curiosity, the kind that is already fueled by desire. I saw her slip through the library door. I entered silently behind her. She stood before the highest shelves, and her fingers, those thin, attentive fingers, traced spines like someone caressing, possibilities. I remained in the shadow, fascinated. And then I saw the hesitation, minimal but revealing. Her fingers stopped at a volume I recognized immediately, even from a distance. The Confessions of a Libertine. An unusual choice. I couldn't help but smile. I stood motionless, like a predator stalking, letting my eyes absorb her entirely. She leafed through the book with the slowness of one who fears what she might find, and yet desires to find it. The languid light of the candle caressed her face, revealing the blush that crept in little by little, as if every printed word burned her skin from the inside out. I saw the exact moment her sweet eyes fastened on a more forbidden paragraph, and like a dissonant chord, her posture changed. Her chest rose on a held breath, her breathing stopped for an instant, and her mouth, previously firm, opened just enough to betray the shock and hunger that seized her. It was like watching a crystal-clear lake churn under the force of a stone thrown into the center, layers of modesty and curiosity colliding in waves she could not control. The flush on her cheeks intensified. Her fingers squeezed the edges of the book with an almost devotional zeal. I knew then that she was lost in those pages, and that she did not remember me, nor the world, nor the rules she so diligently pretended to obey. It was at that instant that I decided to break the spell. "Miss," she started. The candle flickered, and the book slipped from her hands, falling open on the floor, shamelessly exposing the page that had bewitched her. I crossed the distance between us, bending down to pick up the volume before she had a chance to close it. Interesting choice for a night's reading," I murmured, letting my voice slide between us, charged with a very specific kind of provocation. "It is not what it seems," she stammered, her voice tense. "Oh," I took a step forward, cornering her against the bookshelf. "It is exactly what it seems." I took the candle from her hands and placed it on the reading table beside us. Her simple scent, a mix of soap and something unexpectedly feminine, created a sort of gentle siege around me. I leaned in a little further so that she had to raise her face to look at me. "So, the young lady seems to have a certain fascination with men's intimate apparel and daring stories," I said, just to see the reaction. "My lord," she gasped, indignation trembling in every syllable. "You offend me with such an insinuation." I smiled, amused, letting my voice linger longer than necessary. "There is nothing wrong with a woman desiring a man. Curiosity is natural." "It is not curiosity," she countered quickly, but the blush rising up her neck betrayed her in a pleasing way. I leaned in, moving closer until I could feel the warmth of her breath, letting my words almost brush her skin. "If the miss wishes to discover more than what is written, there are things I can explain better than any book." She raised her hand in a quick gesture, clear as day. She intended to slap me, but I was faster. I caught her wrist with a restrained movement. I moved close to her, making it impossible for her to escape the conversation. Her perfume rose to me like a slow poison. My gaze dropped to her lips, the perfect curve, the exact shape that made me lose my mind. My will pleaded for just one step, a single instant of abandonment, to kiss her right there. "You do not need to be ashamed of feeling desires," I murmured, my voice deep, so close that I could feel the slight tremor of her breathing. "It is natural to any lady, even if decorum tries to suffocate it beneath layers of pompous fabric." "I must remind your lordship," she replied, maintaining what composure she had left, "that I am not a lady. I am merely a maid, and your lordship is an earl. I trust completely that you will behave like a gentleman." A direct hit. The attack was sweet and cold at the same time. I felt the weight of the warning, but I did not retreat, not when I had her there so close, and the light in her blue eyes was as contradictory as mine. A mixture of apprehension, fascination, and something that ignited me even more. "All women are ladies, Selina," I murmured, letting her name dissolve in my voice like a secret. "Some just need someone to remind them of it." Her eyes trembled, not in a sudden movement but in a slow blink, as if she wanted to say something and feared that the truth would escape with the air. I saw her attention fasten on my mouth, hesitant, like someone measuring the risk of crossing an invisible line. "Please, my lord." Her voice came out lower than before, almost a whisper that reached me like a touch. I could not resist the plea. "Call me Ross." "I should not. It would be inappropriate, sir." "Selina, call me Ross just once. Let the sound of my name be lost in the sweetness of your voice, and I will forever carry that murmur as the rarest song ever given to me." She took a deep breath, like someone gathering courage. "Ross." Ah, the delight of that single syllable. It was not just music. It was a warm, forbidden wine that burned on the way in and left its taste in my chest. My fingers lightly touched her face, feeling the softness of her skin beneath the tip, and, instead of pulling away, she held her breath, her head tilting in an almost imperceptible gesture, but one that said more than any confession. Her gaze was open, surrendered, and I knew, with the instinctive certainty of a man, that she wanted me too. The silence became thick, as if the room had been sealed just for us, and, before she had time to erect another wall, I touched her lips with mine. The kiss happened like an inevitable stumble, firm, urgent only in the contained emotion, carrying everything that neither of us dared to admit. Her breath met mine in a brief, sincere rhythm that completely disarmed me. The world of the library became a blur. The something between us could no longer be contained. When she finally pulled back a little, her eyes still half closed, I heard a low sound escape her. Not a protest, but a sigh that mixed surrender and something she dared not name. She murmured almost inaudibly, "Please, we must stop, my lord. This is not appropriate. I just wanted a book to help me sleep." The veiled plea fell upon me as both an invitation and a refusal. The memory that she was there for something so simple, and yet so much mine in that instant, almost made me ignore my own conscience. The desire grew, but I knew I had to stop. I slowly released her wrist, freeing her gently. I took one step back, but did not take my eyes off hers. Still clouded, still full of something that burned me inside. I took the candle from the table and walked slowly to the shelf, running my fingers over the spines like someone deliberately prolonging a moment he did not want to end. I chose a volume with a sober cover, without any literary scandal, and returned to her. Perhaps something more suitable for a lady. I extended the book, and the moment her fingers touched mine, I noticed the roughness of her skin. It was not the softness I had imagined so many times. There were small fissures, marks that only hard work leaves. My expression changed before I could prevent it. I took her hand more firmly, examining it in the faint light of the candle, noting the marked and peeling skin. "Does this hurt?" I asked, my voice lower than I intended. She hesitated for an instant. "A little. But what bothers me most is the itching. Sometimes it breaks the skin." A strange, almost intimate concern ran through me. "I will ask my apothecary to prepare an ointment for you, a balm to relieve the discomfort and treat the small wounds." I lightly squeezed her fingers as if to seal the promise. "I will have it delivered tonight." She tried to pull her hand back, but I held it for another instant. I leaned in and lightly kissed her fingers, just a brush, as if I did not want to awaken anything that was not already awake between us. "Good night, Selina. Sweet dreams." My voice sounded almost like a secret. She thanked me in a quick murmur, avoiding my gaze, and hurried out, clutching the book, the candlelight swaying in the corridor. I stood there, motionless, feeling the warmth she had left trapped in my hands. Part of me wanted to run after her, take back that mouth, and savor every last vestige of challenge. Another part cursed me for even desiring such a thing. What the devil was I doing, insinuating myself to a maid? Never in all my life did I think I would stoop to such foolishness. And yet, there was something in her that dismantled me, an impossible mixture of silent pride and restrained fragility, a gaze that did not lower mine, and at the same time seemed to beg me to read it. She was, somehow, a living secret, and every time I walked away, I felt I was closer to losing control than I had ever been. I asked myself if I had just lost my mind, or if, dangerously, I was about to find it in her.
The corridor seemed narrower than ever, the sound of my steps muffled by the hurried beating of my own heart. I could still feel the warmth of his hands holding mine above my head, the firm weight of his body a breath away from mine, the tempting brush of that low voice lacing around me from within, and the kiss. The kiss. Breathtaking, daring, almost forbidden. A strike of fire that left me weak, as if my legs were not my own. The candle flame trembled in my hand, betraying the tremor I was trying to conceal. When I finally closed the door of my room, I faced the volume he had given me, Lyrical Ballads, by William Wordsworth. The cover was sober, the gold of the letters worn by time. I touched it carefully, as if it were an impossible gift to refuse. He had seen me as a woman, whole, not just a maid, and at the same time, had chosen to offer me something pure, delicate, when he could have taken advantage of the moment. The man was a predator, and again, gentleman, balanced in equal measure. I bit my lip, feeling a dull guilt washing over me. I was lying, pretending to be less than I am, hiding a past that he should not discover. And yet, here I was, smiling to myself, wondering when, exactly, I became the target of the advances of the man I should keep at a distance, but who, with a single kiss, had already become impossible to forget. In the days that followed the scene in the library, I did everything to ensure my presence was as discreet as possible. I avoided him with the skill of one who learns to read footsteps in the corridor before even hearing the door open. I performed my tasks with almost mechanical rigor, the linen of the shirts, still warm from the iron, molding beneath my fingers, the clean scent of soap rising from the basin, the drawers closing with precision. I just couldn't avoid the inevitable instant when, passing before the mirror, I recalled, unintentionally, but unable to prevent it, his gaze upon me that day. At night, lying in the silent room, my body betrayed me. I only had to close my eyes to feel the weight of his hand again, his deep voice pronouncing my name as if the whole world fit in those syllables. I tossed and turned in bed, annoyed with myself, trying to expel that memory, but it returned, insolent. The library became forbidden territory. I preferred the suffocating heat of the laundry room to the proximity of that man, but I knew that avoiding him forever would be impossible.
I believe that distance is, at times, a virtue. That is what I try to convince myself of every morning when I pass Selina in the corridor and pretend not to notice the way she lowers her head. I am not proud of what happened in the library. To behave like a scoundrel, to take advantage of a maid is not what is expected of a man who bears my name. And yet, desire is an enemy that does not respect titles. No matter how much I concentrate on work, the memory of her invades me with the force of a closed fist. It was in this state that Perry entered my study, his coat sprinkled with rain, and a smile that betrayed good news before he even spoke. "Good tidings, my lord." He held up an envelope sealed with our family crest. "Lady Victoria arrives in 2 days. My cousin, intelligent, witty, and perhaps a necessary distraction." I smiled for the first time in days. "Victoria?" I leaned back in my chair, already imagining her sarcastic way of commenting on any, subject. "So she will finally keep her promise to visit us." Perry smiled, adjusting the gloves he held. "By the tone of the letter, it will not be just a brief visit. Which means I must prepare my chess set," I commented, closing the envelope. "She has always been ruthless in her matches." "Or simply better than your lordship, brother," Perry retorted, with a boldness few would allow themselves. I raised an eyebrow. "Be careful, Perry. That line between loyalty and insolence is thinner than you think." "Ah, my lord. If I did not remember that, I would never have the pleasure of watching your lordship lose to Lady Victoria." He chuckled softly, as if he already foresaw the scene. I shook my head, a corner of my mouth lifting despite my somber mood. "Arrange her rooms and make sure nothing is lacking. I want her to feel welcome." Perry nodded and left, leaving me alone with the letter on the table. For a few instants, I let the memory of Selina dissolve to make way for the image of Victoria, lively, entertaining, impossible to ignore. Perhaps with her arrival, this house would regain the kind of energy that left me no time to think too much. Or who knows, perhaps it would only remind me of what I truly wanted to avoid.
On the day of the arrival, the courtyard seemed awake from a long winter. The stables were busy, the liveried coachman held the reins steady, and 2 servants were unloading leather trunks adorned with green ribbons. The cold air brought with it the clear sound of a feminine laugh, so musical that it made me stop my step and raise my head. The carriage stopped before the staircase, and Lady Victoria stepped down as if every step were a stage. Tall, graceful, in a deep green dress that highlighted the delicate pallor of her skin and her hazel eyes, her gestures held the confidence of one who knows she is observed and enjoys it. "Cousin," she exclaimed, opening her arms with a luminous spontaneity. I saw Earl Ross advance to receive her, his black overcoat contrasting with the scene's vivacity. He smiled. Not that restrained smile he usually offers, but a genuine half-smile, which even seemed to warm the cold morning. Their embrace was brief, but marked by a cheerful familiarity. "It was about time you kept your promise," he said, with an affectionate irony. "And I brought my arsenal to beat your lordship at chess," she retorted, raising her chin with false haughtiness. This time, no excuses about work or meetings with neighbors to flee defeat. The brief laugh that followed made me avert my gaze, only to meet his again. A quick, almost involuntary look that swept over me like a mute caress, sending a shiver down my spine before I had time to regain my composure. Victoria then adopted a theatrically sorrowful tone. Unfortunately, my companion fell ill on the eve of the journey. I came only with the coachman and a trusted family servant. The Earl arched an eyebrow, and I noticed a shrewd flash in his beautiful blue eyes, the kind of glint that betrayed a thought he would not share. He turned to me, like someone who already had the solution prepared. Not entirely unprotected, he said, his voice low, yet firm. Selina will look after you. She is entirely trustworthy. I felt the weight of that trust, and the greater weight of the gaze that accompanied it. I could not refuse. I slightly inclined my head and murmured that it would be an honor. Inside, however, the relief was silent. I would finally leave the work that hurt my hands, and gain a feminine shield against that man who seemed to see much further than I wished.
It was impossible not to notice the slight astonishment in Selina's eyes when I suggested she accompany Victoria. I do not know if she expected me to prefer to keep her away, and perhaps if I were a sensible man, I would have done exactly that. But sense and desire rarely share the same space, and in my case it seemed that one suffocated the other. In the following days, the friendship between them blossomed with an almost irritating speed. Victoria had this innate ability to engage people around her, but what bothered me was seeing how Selina responded to it, with a sparkle in her eyes that was not directed at me. They walked together in the gardens, shared muffled laughter that escaped like musical notes down the corridor, and even the way they leaned in to exchange confidences gave me the strange feeling that I had been banned from a place I had never had a right to. One afternoon, from the study window, I saw them crossing the lawn. Victoria's green dress stood out like a festive flag, and beside her Selina, with her discreet posture yet so naturally graceful that even the simplicity of her dress seemed an ornament. It was unfair how much her presence drew my eyes, and how much it tortured me. The instant they approached the pergola, I heard Victoria comment something about a season in Paris, and Selina replied, without hesitation, with a phrase in impeccable French, the kind of pronunciation that is not learned by chance. I found myself frowning, curious. One more quality discovered, one more enigma she added to my collection of suspicions. Her laugh, lighter than I had ever heard, reached me carried by the wind, and like a fool, I wondered if that sound had ever had me as its cause. When I finally returned to the room, I found Perry near the fireplace, stirring the embers with a satisfied expression. "It seems my cousin has taken possession of the house, and a certain maid," I murmured, pouring myself brandy to mask the harsh note that threatened to settle in my voice. He let out a short laugh. "It is rare to see Lady Victoria so well accompanied, but I must admit, there is something about that young woman. I cannot say what, but it is as if she resonates differently." I pretended not to care, raising the glass to my lips. Inside, his phrase kept hammering. Who was Selina after all? And why did every smile she gave to someone else feel like a theft? Something that stole from me and which, for honor, I could not reclaim. While Perry spoke about the next week's hunt, I forced myself to maintain my composure, but my eyes involuntarily sought the window, and there they were again, two silhouettes side by side, complicit. My cousin and the woman I had no right to want, and who, to my misfortune, no longer looked at me as before. That night, when I saw them going up the stairs laughing like accomplices, I realized the truth. It would not be easy to find her alone again. I would have to share her. And as absurd as it was, this idea bothered me more than anything I had felt in recent years.
Lady Victoria had a natural way of drawing words out of me. We talked about dresses I might never wear, about rare flowers she had seen in London gardens, about small extravagances that seemed taken from an illustrated book. It was as if she carried a piece of sun inside her suitcase. Wherever she went, she warmed the air around her. Beside her, I felt less conscious of the burden I carried, less reminded that under that roof was a man capable of shaking everything I considered firm within me. And there was another relief, a quieter one, yet equally welcome. My hands, after a few days away from the buckets and harsh cleaning fluids, were beginning to regain the smooth skin I knew before, which evidently was also a reflection of the Earl's kindness. The ordered ointment truly brought great relief. The pinkness gradually returned, and the fine fissures were giving way to an almost forgotten softness. It was not ingratitude toward the work. Quite the opposite. Now that I lived on the other side, I realized how much the servants' labor sustained the invisible comfort of the drawing rooms. Heavy work, often forgotten, that deserved respect. But my hands, they seemed to harbor a particular rebellion against the products. And, free from the itching, I felt as if I had recovered a small piece of myself. However, only an instant was enough for all the tranquility to dissipate. Sometimes, at the end of the day, he would appear. A figure, whose presence was impossible to ignore, casually leaning against a doorframe, as if merely observing the house's movement. But I knew, or felt, that it was not quite that. There was something in the way his eyes met mine, fixed, motionless, and every time it happened, a heat rose up my neck, descending in waves to where I dared not think. I looked away, pretending attention to Victoria's words, but inwardly I chastised myself. What kind of woman allows herself to be so disturbed? By a man who should not even notice her? And worse, why did every time his deep voice echoed nearby, whether to give orders to the butler or exchange a distracted phrase with his cousin, I feel as if the sound passed through my skin before it even reached my ears? Perhaps it was a just punishment. Perhaps it was the living reminder that, no matter how much I wanted to hide, danger never moves away from one who has already tasted the desire for what she cannot have. Victoria had spent the morning locked in the music room, dedicated to a new piano arrangement. I, on the other hand, had the rare gift of a free day. Wearing my most sober dress and a light shawl over my shoulders, I walked down the road that led to the village. The church was on the small hill to the north, surrounded by low walls covered in moss. Inside, the smell of wax and polished wood seemed to welcome even the most restless thoughts. I knelt in the last pew, unhurriedly, letting the silence between the ancient walls calm my heart. Afterward, I crossed the main square to the small post office. At the time-worn counter, I handed the clerk a sealed envelope, nothing special on the outside, but whose content carried more weight than I would like to admit. "It will be dispatched today, miss," he said with a nod. I thanked him, feeling a slight tightness in my chest. I walked down the main street towards the estate. The sun filtered through the clouds, and for a moment, life seemed simple, until a rough voice interrupted my peace. "Well, if it isn't the young woman from the big house." Two men emerged from a corner, smelling of smoke and with the air of vagrants. One of them, whom I vaguely recognized as the son of a local merchant, advanced half a step. "Alone? How careless. Excuse me, I am in a hurry." I quickened my pace, but they moved to block me, their malicious smile growing. "No need to rush, little one. We can talk. Get to know you better. We can accompany you home." My heart pounded loudly in my ears. I looked around. The street was almost deserted. It was then that I heard another voice, deep and sharp as a blade. I believe the miss said she was in a hurry.
I had followed her since she left the estate. It was not espionage, or perhaps it was. Something about that letter dispatched at the post office had stirred an instinct I could not silence. There was a weight in the gesture, a secret in the way she held the envelope before handing it over. When I rounded the corner and saw two men surrounding her, a cold flame of anger immediately ran through me. One of them blocked the path, the other smiled insolently. "Move aside." My voice cut, the air low and firm. The nearest one retreated, but the other dared to ask with a half-laugh, "And who are you to give orders?" I straightened my shoulders, letting the title echo with all the weight of my lineage. "Lord Ashworth, the Earl of Windmere. And to ensure that you do not permanently harm yourselves, I suggest you leave here now." Their wide-eyed look was almost satisfying. Without another word, they turned and disappeared down the street, swearing softly. She stood, there motionless, her fingers clutching her shawl, her cheeks flushed not only with shame, but with the embarrassment of having been rescued. "Will you tell me whom you were writing to?" I asked, my blood still hot. "With all due respect, the matter is private, and is none of your lordship's concern. It is when it concerns my house, and you. You are under my protection, and you are being very mysterious." I took a step beside her, imposing the way back. "And may I know why? You left unaccompanied." "It is my day off. I believe I have the freedom to enjoy the day as I see fit." Heavens, this creature is getting bolder every day. "You know it is not safe for a young lady to wander alone out there." My voice sounded harsher than I intended, but I did not correct it. What would have happened if I had not appeared? She looked at me like someone measuring a risk, her head slightly raised, her eyes sharp, scrutinizing me as if trying to decipher something. Hidden between my words, "Is your lordship following me?" Her tone was not playful. Why would I do that? I returned with a studied calm, even though inside the simple fact of having her there already dismantled my reason. She did not need to know how much I was losing control. Not yet. I leaned in just enough to reduce the distance, and before she could insist, I stole her attention. "Your hands. Are they better?" Her gaze faltered, lowering to her own fingers, as if the memory of my touch on her skin was still there. "They are, yes, the ointment helped a lot." A brief, almost shy pause. "And thank your lordship for recommending me for the companion position." A break from the Marseille soap accelerated the recovery. But please do not misunderstand me. I am not complaining about my responsibilities. I am satisfied to know that you got along well with Victoria. I looked at her sideways, with the outline of a smile that did not reach my lips. "She seems to harbor an unusual appreciation for you." I slightly inclined my head, as if only remembering something unimportant. "Ah, and the other day, I heard you reply in French to an observation from Victoria." Brief pause, studying her reaction. "I did not know you spoke French. Where did you learn?" A slight blush rose to her cheeks. "I learned in the house where I lived, with the mistress." "Is that so?" The doubt sounded in my tone, but not in an accusatory way. "Your mistress seemed very cultivated and generous then. And you?" I let my gaze slowly descend to her mouth before returning to her eyes. "Absorb every new piece of knowledge in a remarkable way. You quote famous authors, you speak French. It is impressive and curious." Her eyes faltered for an instant before regaining their pride. "I have a good memory." "Ah, yes, memory." I slightly curved my lips, remembering the day I interviewed her and she mentioned the skill. "Your memory is indeed fascinating. It comforts me to know that you do not easily forget anything, even though you advise me to do so." The blush returned, more intense, and she averted her eyes. I smiled, satisfied, for knowing that she perfectly understood the reference to the forbidden kisses. We returned to the estate together, side by side, with a silence that was not hostile. Far from it. There was a strange complicity in it, as if every step marked an unsaid pact. The cold wind came from the field, but the warmth of her presence beside me was more insistent than any breeze. I could feel that Selina was quieter than usual, guarding words like someone who fears that anyone might betray her. And if there was something I refused to do, it was waste such a perfect opportunity to elicit a reaction from her. Provoking her was almost an addiction, and that afternoon, I had no intention of holding back. "Since you left the laundry?" I spoke in a tone that seemed casual but carried a calculated venom. "My shirts no longer seem the same." She looked away, pressing her lips together, trying to contain a smile. I leaned in a little, as if sharing an indecent confidence. "And my drawers." I let the pause prolong, the corner of my mouth curving, "are crying out for the help of your skilled hands." The blush rose to her face like the dawning of a hurried sun. "My lord." The reprimand came quickly, but not firm enough to hide the amused spark in her eyes. "It is true." I laughed with a lightness I had not felt in a long time. "They seem abandoned to their own fate." It was then that she yielded, actually laughing, the pure, crystalline sound that pierced my bones. I stood motionless for an instant, just drinking that sound, as if it were rare wine. But along with the pleasure came the sharp pang of the memory, the library, the stolen kiss, the way I had her completely surrendered under my control. "About that night," I began, my tone graver now. "I owe you an apology, not just for the impulse, but for the cheeky way I—" "No," she cut me off, the smile fading from the corner of her lips, and the sparkle already less light. "Do not mention it. Please leave it in the past. I ask you to forgive me," I murmured, unable to take my eyes off her. "But I cannot forget." She shuddered. I did too. And the fire that passed between our eyes at that moment was not just desire. It was almost Pain. The pain of having to restrain oneself, of knowing that any step forward would change everything. We continued like this, to the gate, the silence more eloquent than any I had ever known.
The drawing room was warmed by the fireplace and the murmur of conversations. Fine porcelain occasionally clinked as cups were set on saucers, and the aroma of jasmine tea mingled with the woody scent that always seemed to accompany Lord Ashworth. I was settled in an armchair near the bookshelf, pretending to read, or trying to. The book open on my lap was, in fact, a shield. My eyes stubbornly escaped the printed lines to observe him. He and Lady Victoria were seated side by side, engrossed in a game of whist. His posture was impeccable, and yet there was something relaxed about his shoulders when Victoria laughed at an improbable move. Perry, always at ease, was leaning against the far end of the room, with that carefree manner that poorly disguised his sharp wit. "I confess, my lord, that this house is too solemn," he said with a crooked smile. "We need movement." "Movement?" Victoria lifted her eyes from the deck of cards. "Yes, my dear cousin. An event. Something to shake the dust off Windmere's drawing rooms and give the local society a reason to visit us." She seemed to grow taller just with the idea. "A soiree, perhaps? Or a ball?" "A ball would be perfect," said Perry, pouring himself more tea. "And of course in your honor, Lady Victoria." "In my honor?" She laughed, leaning towards her cousin. "Then it will be you, Ashworth, who will open the first dance with me. If it is inevitable," he said, and there was an amused glint in his eye that escaped before he returned to the cards. My stomach tightened. A ball meant invitations, familiar faces, perhaps coming from places where my name was not buried as deep as I would like. I smiled at the page I wasn't reading, but a shiver ran down my spine.
I let Victoria and Perry exchange ideas about musicians, flowers, and invitations, only throwing in occasional answers. Inside, my attention was focused on another matter. Thomas Fenwick entered the drawing room discreetly, as only he knew how to do. A competent secretary knows the right moment to approach. I signaled for him to sit next to me while Perry distracted Victoria with a heated discussion about whether we should serve French wine or only local drinks. "I need you to do something for me," I murmured low enough for only him to hear. "Discreetly. Always, my lord. Selina." The name came out almost in a whisper, but I felt the weight of it in my own mouth. Gather information about her past. Nothing ostentatious. I do not want to stir the surface, but find out where she came from, who recommended her for the position, and if there are gaps in the story. Understood. Any urgency? Just as soon as possible. My eyes involuntarily sought her. Out, still sitting with the book on her lap, her fingers turning pages with feigned attention. There was tension in the way she held the spine, as if the paper were an anchor. Thomas followed my gaze, and I warned him with a slight narrowing of my eyes. He was not to form opinions. Yet, with absolute discretion, I repeated. He nodded and moved away. While the buzz about the ball continued, I felt that restlessness that had pursued me since she arrived, an instinct that, when the guests step through those doors, something will come to light, and when it does, I want to be ready.
The day dawned with a veil of unease over me, as if the air carried invisible particles capable of awakening memories I preferred to keep buried. As I arranged the correspondence on the sideboard, Lord Perry's words from the day before still echoed. A ball, in honor of Lady Victoria's arrival. I knew this moment would come. Parties and social gatherings were almost an obligation for families like theirs, but knowing did not make the prospect of placing myself in a room full of gazes any easier. When Lady Victoria came down for breakfast, radiant as always, I tried to adopt my calmest tone. "My lady, I believe I will not be at my best tonight. Perhaps it would be better for me to remain in my quarters." She looked at me as if hearing a child ask not to open a present. "Nonsense, Selina. I will not give up your company. You will rest during the afternoon, and at night we will get ready together. I want you to see the transformed drawing room. I want your opinion on everything." Her smile was charming, but left no room for objection. I resigned myself with a nod. Inside, I felt my heart hammering in an uneven cadence. I spent the morning assisting Lady Victoria with notes on the arrangement of the tables and flowers, and organizing every detail with the housekeeper. But with each new guest list, A shadow seemed to glide over my thoughts. Who could be there? Who could recognize me? In the early afternoon, I retreated to my room, claiming the promise of rest. But resting was impossible. My fingers drummed on the bedspread, my gaze sought the ceiling, and my mind went back and forth between memories and escape hypotheses. Even imagining the choice of a dress seemed a dangerous act, as if the fabric could reveal more than it should.
There was something curious about the way she avoided talking about the ball. It was not simple modesty or discomfort with formal clothes. It was deeper, a kind of calculated withdrawal, as if her every word was measured not to betray the real reason for her reluctance. I found her in the corridor hours later, carrying a small tray with tea for Lady Victoria. She tried to pass me as one who is merely performing a trivial duty, but I decided to intercept her. "I hear you are not feeling well for tonight?" I leaned lightly against the door frame, my body blocking the way but maintaining a polite smile. "It is only a slight malaise, my lord. Nothing to worry about." "Interesting." I let the pause linger, because to me it looks more like a case of strategic escape. She raised her chin, maintaining her composure. "I do not know what your lordship is talking about." "You do, yes." I leaned in slightly, enough for her to catch the lower tone. "You flee from certain types of gazes, and I would like to know why." Her eyes faltered, only for a second before returning to firmness. "Some gazes are not worth the discomfort. Is mine worth it?" I asked, and noticed the slight blush that spread across her face. She tried to go around me on one side, but I took a half step to adjust my position, forcing her to pass within inches of me. The aroma of the tea mixed with the light perfume of her skin, creating a dangerous distraction. "Just make sure," I continued, "you are in the drawing room tonight. I want to see if Miss Selina is capable of smiling at strangers as well as she smiles at Lady Victoria." As she moved away, I heard her breathing change. It was an almost imperceptible sound, but enough to intrigue me even more. It was not just curiosity. It was the feeling that there was an enigma there, and I was ready to decipher it, even if it cost me the composure I had always been proud to maintain.
The drawing room looked different. Open curtains allowed the light of the lamps to reflect on the polished surfaces, multiplying light and movement. The main chandelier, newly polished, scattered golden sparks across the walls, as if a constellation had descended to hover over our heads. The orchestra was already tuning its instruments, and the sweet smell of flowers mingled with the delicate aroma of tea and wine served on silver trays. Beside Lady Victoria, my posture was impeccable. A measured smile contained gestures, head inclinations in the exact dose for each greeting. But, behind every gesture, my attention worked feverishly, calculating escape routes. If a familiar face appeared in the corridor, if a voice from the past called me by the name that should not be pronounced here. "Selina, smile," Victoria whispered between greetings. "It is a night for celebration." I obeyed, but the smile I offered was not whole. The weight of what could happen hovered, like a perfume that does not dissipate.
They tried. Oh, how they tried. Ladies in dresses that looked more like embroidered armor of plumes and glitter, young women with sidelong glances, disguised under their fans, approaching with trivial questions about the weather or the wine. But I only saw one woman. She stood next to Victoria, greeting every guest as if she were on a stage, but there was something in the way her eyes moved, as if constantly searching for exits. It was a game, and she believed I did not perceive. The rules. I raised the glass of brandy to my lips, letting the warmth of the drink accompany me as I watched. Perry, next to Victoria, was lively, exchanging quick comments with the guests. I, however, kept my attention fixed on Selina. With every courteous laugh she offered, I could swear there was a brief moment when her gaze turned to everywhere. But me. I approached slowly, without breaking the distance, studying her as a general observes the field before choosing where to advance. She felt it. I know she felt it. Her shoulders stiffened for an instant, and I saw how her hands, though delicate, clenched the edge of her skirt, as if that were her only anchor. Selina. I whispered her name only when I was close enough for no one else to hear. She looked up, And there was the spark that always hits me without warning. It burned. A silent exchange, a mutual recognition that between us, there was no neutral space. I continued to ignore the other feminine presences around me, each trying to attract my attention with a laugh or a comment. My gaze did not waver from her, not while I realized how every inch of her body seemed attentive to my proximity. It was not the time to strike, not yet, but the entire drawing room could collapse and I would still know where she was, what she was thinking, and how much she wished to escape.
The drawing room, with all its music and laughter, began to suffocate me. It was not just the heat of the lights, nor the tightness of the stays. It was the weight of memories that threatened to break through the veil of the present. I saw, among the newcomers, a face that made me tremble, then another, which forced me to look away so fast that I almost stumbled. Maintaining my practiced smile, I slipped to the side, taking advantage of the coming and going of ladies and servants to escape. A narrower, poorly lit corridor opened before me. The sound of the orchestra became distant, as if it were a memory, and the air seemed denser, almost tangible. My heart beat in an irregular rhythm, as if guessing something my mind dared not formulate. Footsteps, not hurried, not noisy, but certain. They were following me.
She moved like one who wishes to disappear unseen, but for me it was the opposite. Her every step was a summons. The silks of her dress reflected the sparse light of the corridor, and there was something in the way she held her skirt, revealing the delicate outline of her wrist that made the blood rush to my head. When I reached her, she turned abruptly. The look she offered me was not one of surprise, but of an inevitable recognition, as if she knew from the instant she left the drawing room that I would come. "Are you running away, Miss Elmswood?" I asked, my voice low, charged with a provocation that barely concealed desire. "No, I just needed air." The answer was too quick. "Air?" I smiled sideways. "Or distance?" The blush that rose to her cheeks was the invitation I needed. Reason, that ungrateful companion, gave way to instinct. I moved closer until the heat of our bodies met. Her perfume, a mix of flowers and something indefinable, was more dangerous than any wine. "You know you are beautiful, do you not?" I murmured, pinning her against the carved wooden wall. "So beautiful that I wonder how I still have not." I did not finish the sentence. Instead, I kissed her. It was like catching my breath after days submerged. Since the last instant her lips touched mine, every night had been a silent battlefield, where my body clamored for what reason commanded me to forget. Now, having her there, alive in my arms, was like tasting again the only thing that seemed indisputably right in my life. Her scent, her contained surrender, the subtle tremor in the fingers resting on my chest, everything told me that, however much I had tried to push her away from my obsessions, Selina was the fixed point in the middle of the chaos. The answer I did not admit seeking, but which, upon finding it, made turning back impossible.
His kiss was not a question. It was a declaration. His hands, warm and firm, molded my waist as if they wanted to memorize every curve. I lost myself in him for a few eternal seconds. The world dissolved into distant music, and only the low sound of my own surrendered sigh remained. Ross. Hearing my whisper, he closed his eyes and smiled. A sinful smile, slow and warm as hell. "You make me lose my mind, Selina," he whispered against my skin, with his voice alone. "Why have you bewitched me like this? Please, my lord. It is dangerous for both of us." My words were a breath, more a plea to myself than to him, but he did not retreat. He took my hand, led me to an even darker recess, where the heavy curtains muffled even the sound of the ball. With a single gesture, he lifted me into his arms, in a warm embrace. "God forgive me." His voice was deep, dense as velvet over steel, but I would be capable of sending my honor to hell and surrendering to you right here. Such is the desire that numbs me whenever I see you. I felt the air thin. His striking presence surrounded me, his tense muscles pressing me against the wall, his every breath marking my skin as if claiming me for himself. His mouth sought my ear in a whisper, and the proximity made my spine shiver. The touch of his hands, a paradise apart. When his mouth returned to mine, demanding, the world dissolved into a single point of heat and flavor. My fingers tangled in his hair, descended to the contour of his broad shoulders, feeling the strength that could easily make me forget the world around me. Until, in a painful flash of lucidity, a survival instinct made me break the spell. I pushed him away with a gentle but firm shove, gasping, like one who pulls herself out of a hypnotizing abyss. "We are mad." My voice failed, but I kept my gaze fixed, intense, letting him see the truth that burned inside me. "Your lordship is an earl, and I am inappropriate for your lordship." He stared at me with dark eyes, dilated by desire, and in the depths of them I saw something that almost made me turn back, a silent promise that he would not let me escape. And it was for that reason, precisely for that reason, that I forced myself to turn away quickly, smoothing the silk of my dress with trembling hands, repressing the urge to run back into his arms. I left through the corridor with my heart racing, every step being a flight and a silent confession that I also wanted him, more than I should.
I followed her without thinking, like a hunter who refuses to lose his prey. But before I could reach her, I heard, "My lord, I need to speak urgently." Thomas Fenwick, appearing out of nowhere, blocked my path. "Not now, Thomas. It is important, sir. It is about the maid's investigation." I looked over his shoulder and saw Selina re-enter the drawing room, a few steps ahead. She was breathless, her eyes fixed on the floor. Then, a feminine voice, laden with surprise, sounded. Above the music, "Lady Selina Ravenshade? Heavens, how long it has been since I saw you, dear." Selina stopped as if she had been hit. She smiled dryly with a slight nod, but turned her back on the Baroness, who was looking at her dumbfounded. Without her noticing, she was facing me again. Our gazes crossed like sharp swords for a duel. My body reacted before my mind. I pushed Thomas aside and approached slowly, locking her in my gaze until I was very close. "Lady what?" I asked, my voice low, but charged with surprise and contained fury. She looked at me firmly, and in that instant I knew there was much more to that woman than any lie she had tried to tell me. Around us, guests began to notice, and Thomas was still behind me, holding information that suddenly became more urgent than ever. The entire drawing room seemed suspended, waiting for the next step. A lady pretending to be a maid, in my house, lying to me with those insolent lips that still dare to deny me answers. Ah, my dear, she little knows that I will squeeze until every drop of truth escapes, and when that happens, there will be no turning back. And you, want to see how it ends?
For heaven's sake, I'm in trouble. I have no idea how I'm going to escape this mess. And frankly, maybe I don't even want to. But I can't say that out loud, can I? You understand. So help me. Comment part 2 if you want to know what will happen to me, because I myself am desperate to find out the consequences of my secret. Enjoy, subscribe, click that hype button, and, for the love of the Queen's fan, turn on notifications and stay close. Something tells me things are only going to get worse from here. I'll see you in the next video. If I survive the count until then, I promise I won't take long.